Estás escuchando Pensamiento Espiral, un podcast para sanar nuestra relación con la Madre Tierra. Mi nombre es Juan Diego Beltran y te doy la bienvenida a un nuevo episodio. Bogotá is 11,470 kilometers away from Daza. We are separated by oceans and continents. We are separated by language and culture. And at least in principle, we should also be separated by the decades of investment through which Israel and the global North have tried to dehumanize the Palestinian people and attempted to disfigure their history so that even we in the global South would be unable to recognize ourselves in their struggle. But as soon as we met Palestinian activist Leila and Najla Abdellatif in the neighborhood of La Soledad in downtown Bogotá, all of these factors that were supposed to separate us were rendered powerless and illusory. Because as you can imagine, it's not every day you get the chance to meet people from Palestine in your own hometown. So the moment we met them, Angelica and I were filled with questions about their lives, about the horrors we've all been witnessing through our screens, and about how in the face of a calamity that has been slowly and cruelly unfolding for decades, the Palestinian people continue to find the strength to carry on. Thus, with hearts full of questions and an urgent need to speak about what's happening in Palestine, we knew this was a rare and precious opportunity to sit down, to listen deeply, and to learn as much as we could from them. An opportunity to speak about all the things that hurt and the things that have been lost, but also to speak about everything that endures. About culture, about memory, about the life that refuses to be silenced, about Palestine and its dream of freedom. Which is why it brings us great joy to share that with the support of organization Mundubat, who brought these two activists to Colombia, we now bring you a unique episode, one we had been dreaming of for months. A rare and privileged space where we travel to Palestine through the voices of two women whose stories carry with strength and dignity the resistance of an entire people. Before we begin though, one important note. The content of this episode will differ from what you might be used to hearing in mainstream media regarding Palestine. Not only because we take a clear and unapologetic stance in condemning the Israeli occupation and the ongoing genocide in Gaza, but also because here at Pensamiento Espiral, we always speak with our hearts rooted to the land. We speak with our hearts rooted in oral memory and traditions of people who fight to protect their territories and whose knowledge holds unique ways of relating to the earth. This episode will be no exception. So yes, we will speak of Palestinian pain, a pain that reverberates across time and space and makes the earth weep. But we will also speak of tradition, of cultural heritage, and of the deep well of resilience that has allowed this tireless people to survive more than 88 years of uninterrupted occupation. Without further ado, you will now listen to 7 reflections layered with soundscapes from the Palestinian territory that will invite you to explore the beauty of Palestinian culture, the deep relationship this people holds with its land and with nature, and the story of a human group that since 1948 continues to resist colonialism, oblivion, and indifference. Chapter 1: The Land.
There is much to say about the connection of the Palestinians to the land.
You are listening to Najla Abdellatif. a Palestinian-Swedish environmental activist and founder of Zero Waste Palestine, an environmental initiative focused on raising ecological awareness and promoting more sustainable, eco-friendly lifestyles in her homeland. The daughter of a Palestinian father and a Swedish mother, Najla has spent most of her life in occupied Palestine, specifically in Jerusalem, where she currently resides.
From a historical perspective, the biggest portion of the Palestinian society is a farmers' society, so naturally they're very much connected to the land and farming and agriculture. It is very much evident and apparent in how Palestinians express themselves through culture, through heritage. I mean, nature and land symbols are very apparent in the folklore, in songs and music and the dances and the clothes that they wear, the embroidery on the textiles that they have, the traditional clothing. But also this kind of connection to the land has become emphasized and become more significant as a result to the colonization and the occupation of the land that has happened. Palestinians have become disconnected from the land, forcefully disconnected. So in that sense, this increased connection to the land, it's not just because of the farming society and the natural, connection that Palestinians have, but also because of this disconnection that has been forced upon them.
Another thing that's really important to remember about land and territory when it comes to Palestine is the sense of belonging.
This is Leila Waraj, a Palestinian-American journalist who lives in the Aida refugee camp just 2 kilometers away from Bethlehem in the West Bank. Her family has lived there since they were forcibly displaced in 1948, following the beginning of the occupation by the Zionist entity erroneously and commonly referred to as the State of Israel. Through her journalism and multimedia work, Leila is committed to exposing the genocide and policies of ethnic cleansing that the Israeli occupation imposes on the Palestinian people.
So one thing that Israel is also taking away from Palestinians with all of their land theft and ethnic cleansing is the sense of belonging to a culture and to a community and to a place. So right now, especially with all of the Palestinian refugees, they're all living in places that it is not their home, it's not their communities. They're living in foreign areas where they're never fully able to connect with the land and with the people. And right now what we're seeing on the ground with Palestinians who are still in Palestine and are resisting Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign across historic Palestine is a really big thing that Palestinians say is, we have nowhere else to go. So this land it's their land. But so like what we're seeing in Area C of the West Bank of Palestinians being kicked off of their land, and they're quite literally being faced with settler attacks every day, violent attacks that are used with the law, preventing them from building on their land, demolishing their homes. And anyone else in that situation would probably be like, this isn't worth it. Why am I staying here and being subjected to all of these attacks? I'm just going to leave. But Palestinians have nowhere to go and nowhere to leave to because it's their land and their home.
Chapter 2, about Palestinian oral tradition.
The mainstream discourse when it comes to Palestine is about the suffering, the violence, the occupation, and often the cultural aspect is forgotten. So it's really important to also highlight the beauty of Palestinian heritage, especially because what the occupation or the colonizer is constantly trying to do is to attempt to erase the concept of Palestine or Palestinians in order to justify its existence. So here, many Palestinians have resorted to storytelling and this oral preservation of history and heritage because preserving these stories becomes a form of resistance in a way, because it's rejecting these attempts to be erased. So for example, the typical hakawati, as you mentioned, the storyteller, this kind of tradition would bring people together in a form of community, where this usually elder person would tell these different stories of the past, stories of our ancestors, the stories of the land, how we used to practice certain traditions or certain things, all these different stories and narratives from the history, from the heritage, that helps people to stay connected to their identity, basically.
With Palestinians living in the diaspora, a lot of Palestinians have never seen Palestine. They've never been there. But you'll meet a Palestinian abroad who's never been to Palestine, and you'll know they're Palestinian because of these stories that their parents and their grandparents and their family members who did get to experience Palestine have passed on. So like for me, growing up outside of Palestine, one of the reasons that I'm here now and do the work that I do is because I grew up with stories from my dad, who was born and raised in Palestine in one of the refugee camps. So he used to tell us stories of growing up in the camp and stories of resistance during the First Intifada and stories of what Palestine is like. And building on those stories, he would tell us stories that my grandmother would tell him, because my grandmother was born and raised in Daraban, which is a village outside of Jerusalem that my family was displaced from. So they went from this village to this refugee camp. And so through those two generations, I now have two generations of history about our family. And without them, I wouldn't know what it was like growing up in Palestine. I wouldn't know what the struggles were. I wouldn't know what it means to resist and why. So these older generations have really kept Palestine alive across the diaspora, so that people who have never had the privilege to visit the land still know what it means to be Palestinian and to know their land. I mean, even in the refugee camp, if you go to any of the children in the refugee camp and ask them, where are you from? They're not going to tell you, I'm from Haida refugee camp. They're going to tell you the village that their family was displaced from, even though they've never seen it, they've never been there, and they have no physical connection to it. And it's just been through this storytelling.
Chapter 3. About traditional foraging.
Linking it back to resistance at long ago and the stories that my dad used to tell us about our grandparents after they were expelled from our land in Jerusalem. My grandfather used to, because this was before the Israeli apartheid wall was built, separating Jerusalem and Bethlehem, where my family now lives. So there wasn't yet a wall, but it was still very difficult to access these areas, which were turned into Israeli settlements. And my grandfather used to sneak onto the land of our land that we were kicked off of to steal, quotation marks, because it was our family's land, to take mlukhia.
Mlukhia is a herb that grows that you can make a stew from, and it's commonly used in the Levant area and in Palestine, Egypt.
So yeah, they would go back and take this mlukhia. They would also take sage and go back and cook with it and cook for their family and be like, this is from our village. And the same thing kind of still happens now, where they'll find sellers who can access the 48 land and will have gone to our family's village and picked herbs from the village, and they'll go and specifically buy the herbs from the village that we were displaced from, even though technically all of the herbs you're going to get are pretty much the same, but it's making that link back to the village and being like, we're still from here and we're still eating from our land, even though we can't access it.
Also, when it comes to food, it's also very political in that sense. So, for example, foraging of wild plants is a way of, is a part of our heritage of Palestinians practicing, foraging in order to cook these traditional Palestinian dishes. But there's a connection between how food is used as a tool for control. The Israeli nature protection authorities have banned Palestinians from practicing foraging foraging of wild plants, such as akub, zatar, sage, which is meramiya, and Palestinians who practice foraging, if they are caught, they have to pay very high fines and sometimes other forms of punishment, and this is only imposed on Palestinians. So that's why it's said that this ban on foraging of wild plants is another tool for control and a tool for banning Palestinians from practicing their heritage. While, if Israelis would forage these wild plants, there's no punishment that would be put on them.
Not only is there no punishment, they will be they'll take an Instagram picture that the Israeli government will post online and be like, look how connected to the land we are.
Chapter 4. About the olive tree.
The olive tree is a native tree that exists in Palestine, and it's one of the most common plants or trees that grows on Palestinian land. During the olive harvest, Palestinian farmers pick the olives and they make oil out of it. And for many families, the olive tree is one of the main sources of income. And it's not just from an economic or financial perspective, but it's also a very important aspect of Palestinian cuisine. Olive oil is used to cook the dishes for breakfast, lunch, dinner. It's a very important ingredient in the way that we eat and the way that we practice our cuisine culture. But the olive trees are a direct target by the settlers as well. Since the beginning of the occupation, around 800,000 olive trees have been destroyed or burned or cut down as a result of apartheid activities and settler colonial activities, such as making way for settlements, settler roads, building the apartheid wall. Also, violence that occurs against Palestinians increases during the olive harvest season, which is during the fall, where the settlers would come like violent mobs and attack Palestinians picking the olives in the groves. That's why also settlers usually burn olive trees. They come during the night or whenever and set fire to the olive trees because they know that this is one of the main incomes for Palestinian farmers.
And then to add on what the violence against these olive trees and Palestinian agriculture in general actually looks like for people who don't necessarily know what the background is, a lot of Palestinian farmland is in the 60% of the West Bank that has been declared Area C, which is under complete Israeli military control. So there's no one you can call if anything happens. You call the Israeli military, what are they going to do? Nothing. And a lot of the time, the settlements, there are a lot of Palestinian farms that are right next to these Israeli settlements. And these settlements want to expand because that's what an Israeli settler colony does. And how do they expand? They need to kick the Palestinians out so they can take their land and expand the settlement with settlers that they're bringing in from abroad, maybe from Colombia, maybe from areas in Europe. And so they use several tactics to attack Palestinian farmers. One is through the law. And while Israeli settlers who are living right next to the Palestinians are tried in civil courts, the Palestinians are tried in military courts. And so Palestinians are subjected to military law and the military's permits of who gets to build. So while Israeli settlers are allowed to build as much as they want, Palestinians can't build. And that includes things like pens for goats. It includes fences around olive trees to protect it from wild animals. It includes their homes. And so if you try to build a wall or something around your olive groves without permission, the Israeli military will come in and bulldoze it and probably fine you a bunch of money. And then on top of that, there's the Israeli settler attacks. So these settlers, they're living on the land with the Palestinians on stolen land. And they can come at any time they want, in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night, whenever. And a lot of the time they're armed with guns. Palestinians are not armed. They don't have the right to defend themselves or to defend their land. So these settlers will come in and violently attack them. Sometimes they get shot, sometimes they get killed. They get threats. If you don't leave your land, we are going to kill your entire family. Sometimes settlers will come in. There have been cases I've heard of them coming in the middle of the night, tying up all of the men, terrifying them, beating them. And sometimes they'll come in dressed as the military, wearing military clothes. Because what's the difference between a soldier and a settler? One is wearing uniform, one is not. And the army works quite closely with the settlers and will defend them and protect them. So if a settler comes to your house and is attacking you, you can't call, like here, if something happens, you call the police. Hi, someone is robbing my house. Please come help me. In Palestine, there's no one you can call because the soldiers and the settlers are one.
Chapter 5: Saviours and Destroyers.
It's definitely an ecocide that is happening currently, not just a genocide, but also an herbicide, an ecocide. And that is also a way to destroy all forms of life and make a place unlivable, not just to kill, but also to forcibly displace people and to kick them out of the land. So it's an ecocide, as a result of all the emissions coming out of the bombings and the pollution and the debris pollution, the tens of millions of tons of debris that is now polluting the air, the water, the land. So even in that form, like even if, for example, Gazans want to practice agriculture and the little land that is left, it will be poisoned because of the pollution that is caused by all these bombings. The farming lands have also been targeted specifically in Gaza. So around 80 to 90% of the farming land has been destructed so that they're not able to practice any form of farming and in a way to cultivate their own food. So in that way, the occupation and the genocide is a typical form of directly targeting the environment and causing environmental degradation and an ecocide. Adding on that they're also showing themselves as the environmental protectors. So this typical statement of that they came and made the desert bloom. Here, nature has been used also as a tool of memory erasure. For example, on top of many Palestinian displaced and destroyed villages, they have made a natural reserve or a nature reserve as a form to show themselves as these, nature protectors, but also as a form to hide the destroyed villages and to hide the memory that these villages carry. So there are many, many different methods in which Israel practices greenwashing. So they use greenwashing as a way to hide the fact that, their typical settler colonial policies. So in contrast to the Palestinians, they show themselves as the protectors and the saviors of the nature.
And then I think an important point to just bring all of these points home and really connect the dots for people is the point of all of this, from the greenwashing to the nature saviors and protectors and painting themselves in this way, all comes down to land conquest. It all comes down to the expansion of Israel, which is a settler colonial state, at the expense of Palestinians. Because the really big thing in a settler colony is, in this case, a Jewish settler colony, Palestinians are a demographic threat to the Jewish population. Because if you want a Jewish state, you need to have them as the majority. The settler population needs to be the majority of the population, so they hold the majority of the votes and the self-determination and all of those things. So in order to expand, it's not just about taking land, but it's about taking Palestinians out so they can put the settlers in. And that's the agenda behind all of these things that we're talking about.
UNO headquarters at Long Island sees a new chapter of international history with the vote on the admission of Israel to the organization. The president, Dr. Ebert, announced that by a vote of 37 to 12, Israel was accepted as a member.
Chapter 6. What the genocide has broken and the things that still endure.
A lot has been broken. Very much a lot. I think it's impossible to encompass the level of damage that has been done to the world order and to what we expect from society and from accountability. Even as someone who doesn't trust and endorse in international law, because international law at the end of the day is the thing that kind of first gave validity to the existence of the Israeli state on top of Palestine and at the expense of Palestinians. But the point that it's past now with the genocide has just gone to a whole other level of the world order, just really proving to me, and I think to a lot of people in the world, the fact that international law doesn't exist for us. It doesn't exist for the global south. It doesn't exist for the people that the world order and these superpowers want to oppress. If they want to do something, they can do it. No one's going to stop them. It doesn't matter what international law says. It doesn't matter who goes to international courts and what is declared, whether someone is a war criminal, whether there's plausible case for genocide, whether. It doesn't matter. And so we've reached a crossroads that this is really a system that is broken.
For me personally, what I see has been broken is the trust in any form of political system or politician, or the majority of politicians around the world. Even like typical United Nations, even though on the surface it might seem that they are, very much supporting, and many times they are doing a good job, but just the idea that they are unable to implement any promise that they always say that they stand for.
But you also asked what's not broken. There has been an overwhelming amount of love and support for the Palestinian cause, standing against Israel's settler colony and standing against this world order that's being imposed on us. And even just coming here to Colombia and seeing it's so far from Palestine. We got on how long of a flight? A really long flight to get here. And there's still so many people supporting Palestine here and standing with Palestine and protesting for Palestine and drawing really important links between the Palestinian struggle and the struggle here and struggles globally.
It's very heartwarming to see the increased solidarity. And in some way, the Palestinian question was, before the genocide, it was more kind of I wouldn't say forgotten, but it wasn't making headlines because it's such a long history of the struggle that many people have kind of forgotten of it in a way. So it has really become on top of people's minds now, and seeing all the civil society organizations and people and individuals around the world, how much they're, standing in solidarity, that's very heartwarming.
At the end of the day, people are realizing that we're all fighting the same thing, and we're all fighting these same countries that are repressing all of us together. That these supposed democratic states that are better than everyone and put on this pedestal of freedom and justice and democracy are an absolute farce. They're not true, they're not democratic, and they're gonna do whatever they want. And I do agree that the power is in the people, but we need to use that power, and we're not using that power enough, because we need to be kind of combining as people and combining our problems and remembering we're one people and one group. And to really use the fact that the power is in the people, we need to stand as not just as a country, not one country and one country and one country, but as the world and as a collective, and kind of really stand up against these powers that are pushing all of us down. And so I think it really drills home the fact that nobody's free until we're all free.
Epilogue. Ending the silence. As you listen to this, the genocide in Gaza and the illegal expansion of Israel over Palestinian territory continue to unfold. Since October 7th, over 58,000 lives and stories have become buried beneath the rubble. And with them, our shared humanity. This is no longer a time to ignore what's happening, nor to remain hiding in complicit silence while horror unfolds with absolute impunity. This concerns all of us, and for that reason, these times demand more from all of us. It is time to raise our expectations of ourselves, of the authorities, of economic powers, of corporation, and of all political actors that enable this genocide with their money, rhetoric, and propaganda. It is also time to demand accountability from those states that have taken steps to condemn Israel, but whose words have yet to be translated into decisive actions to isolate and sanction a Zionist entity built on supremacism, colonialism, and crimes against humanity. So if upon listening to this episode you feel that unmistakable call urging you to do more and to take a stand against oppression and hatred, we've compiled a list of resources in the episode description that offer tangible ways to support the Palestinian cause. From actions aimed at mitigating suffering, to supporting grassroots organizations, to making economic choices that cut off support to the Zionist entity and its global enablers. The Palestinian cause is close to our hearts, and we assure you that from Pensamiento Espiral, we will continue fighting the narrative battle against propaganda, misinformation, and silence. But above all, we will continue to raise our voices and work alongside the Palestinian people to tell more of their stories, because we hold the unshakable conviction that as long as Palestinian memory endures, Israel and its genocide will have failed. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. This episode was produced by Juan Diego Beltran and Angelica Daza. Script, editing, and sound design by Juan Diego Beltran. We would also like to reiterate our gratitude to Mundubat and Ruta Pacifica de las Mujeres for making this interview possible. Lastly, we extend our deepest admiration to Leila and Najla, and we thank you for sharing your stories with us.